The first Avengers movie was more than just a great movie that did well at the box office. It forced our beloved comic book heroes to fight as a team and established them as a force dedicated to keeping Earth safe. But as we saw during Endgame, heroes aren't around forever. Whether they'll bid a final farewell or just fade into the background, we have to wonder, what will happen when the heroes we have now stop showing up? Will they have a hand in shaping the next generation of heroes, or is there something more tragic in store for them? Thor is a hero who has undergone a huge transformation since he first appeared in the MCU. In the first movie, he was incredibly self-centered and immature, nowhere near worthy of wielding Mjolnir or ruling Asgard. It took many years and quite a few films until Thor was finally ready to be responsible for Asgard. But fate had other plans in store for the God of Thunder. Instead of lording over the throne of Asgard, he found himself reeling from Ragnarok and looking for a new home for his fellow Asgardians. After the events of Avengers Infinity War, they arrived on Earth and set up New Asgard, a place we saw during Endgame. After the decimation was undone and Thanos was finally defeated, this would have been the perfect time for Thor to assume the throne and bring all of the lessons and wisdom he'd obtained over the years into making New Asgard flourish. But that's not at all how it played out. In fact, Thor decided to totally abandon his new home. Although he left it in the very capable hands of Valkyrie, he ultimately relinquished his responsibilities and took off with the Guardians of the Galaxy to parts unknown. While Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy have an undeniably amusing back and forth, this could easily be seen as a step back. And while Earth may seem like a safe place for the Asgardians to be, it can also be a dangerous place for Thor. This hero's connection to humanity has waxed and waned over the course of his time in the comic books. While he's befriended and even fallen in love with humans, he is ultimately the person responsible for the safety of the Asgardians. So when the interest of the Asgardians and the humans conflict with one another, Thor's allegiance can easily be tested, and even the God of Thunder himself hasn't always been happy with the results. In the comics, Thor goes through a time where he loses his connection to the common man and becomes more like a dispassionate deity. The Church of Thor ends up running afoul of the Avengers, and this ends with Thor losing his arm and his worthiness, but ultimately conquering the Earth. Eventually, Thor realizes this was a mistake and was able to set things right with some help from time travel. And let's not forget that Ragnarok isn't a one-and-done event in the comics. It's a repeating cycle of destruction and rebirth. And similarly, in the comics, Thor is sundered and reborn again and again, but he just can't shake his ties to Asgard, at least not for long. At the end of the day, Thor can't run away from his responsibilities no matter how hard he tries. In War of the Realms, Thor ultimately becomes the new Allfather, stepping into the role his father Odin once commanded. This seems like a likely and fitting end to his story, especially since Odin had been trying to get him to sit on the throne since the very first Thor movie. And there are many heroes willing to fight for both Asgard and Earth, including Jane Foster, who will be the new mighty Thor in Thor: Love and Thunder. Thor's story in the MCU is vastly different from what he experiences in the comic books, but a lot of the emotions and trauma he experiences are similar to what he goes through in the comics. During a fight with Nick Fury, Thor gets incapacitated, and Fury whispers something which shakes Thor to his core and causes him to lose all of his confidence. He also loses his ability to wield Mjolnir, which is what leads to Jane Foster picking up the hammer in the first place. Later, it's revealed that what Nick Fury whispered to Thor was basically confirmation of Thor's hidden belief that gods are too out of touch with mortal life. During Infinity War, we saw Thor try to strike down Thanos only to fail because he let his need for revenge blind him. After the decimation, Thor blamed himself and was consumed with feelings of guilt and worthlessness. He was terrified that he was no longer worthy of wielding Mjolnir or being a hero. By the end of Endgame, his self-esteem had improved and he was proven worthy of using his hammer, but he still didn't feel right ruling Asgard. Perhaps Mighty Thor's journey will end up having an impact on Thor during Love and Thunder like it does in the comic books, and he'll realize his true place is ruling over Asgard. Marvel movie fans don't have to wonder what it would look like if Clint Barton retired, because we've actually seen him retire, at least temporarily. When he isn't helping the Avengers save the world, Clint prefers to spend time at home with his family, but it's become clear that he feels responsible for the safety of Earth and just can't help but step up when the chips are down. Staying home with his family wasn't an option for this hero during Avengers Age of Ultron, and then again during Captain America Civil War. But Clint's permanent retirement would likely have something to do with what we saw him taking part in before his family was decimated. We saw Clint and his family in an idyllic scene in which he was training his daughter how to shoot a bow and arrow. He even called her Hawkeye. In the comic books, there is a younger female Hawkeye who Clint does help mentor at one point. Her name is Kate Bishop, and she's a character on one of the shows being featured on the Disney Plus streaming platform. This will be way more than just helping his daughter pass the time while he's on house arrest. Clint will most likely have a big hand in shaping an important team of Marvel superheroes. The Avengers, as they once were, are no more, but the MCU will inevitably face threats that require an entire team of heroes to deal with. In the comics, Kate Bishop is one of the earlier members of the Young Avengers. She even uses Clint's bow and his old moniker since he passed around and isn't there to use either. Or at least he was. The Scarlet Witch had an intense episode which caused a cataclysmic event leading to Clint losing his life. Eventually, he came back and adopted the Ronin title and fighting style, which should look familiar to even those fans who haven't read the comics. That's because after his family was decimated, Clint showed up in Avengers Endgame as Ronin, and now we know he's going to be training Kate Bishop to be the new Hawkeye on the small screen. Even if Clint is officially retired, he's still not going to be able to resist scoring a bullseye whenever possible. Just like he helped assemble the team for the original MCU Avengers, it's likely he would be available as a resource to help out the next generation of heroes, namely the Young Avengers. But there's another big aspect of Clint's story many fans are eager to see play out first. There have been a few times in the history of Marvel Comics when Clint loses his hearing to some degree. During a fight with Crossfire, Clint ended up losing his hearing and being forced to rely on a hearing aid. He's also had his origin story retconned to make him born deaf. And he also lost his hearing after being struck in the ear by Clown. When Clint first appeared in the MCU, many fans were disappointed that this aspect of his character wasn't included in his story. But it's possible that could change, especially with the cast list we have for Marvel's Phase 4. The Eternals movie has an all-star cast, and among them is Tony nominee Lauren Ridloff. She'll be playing the part of the Eternal Makari, and she'll also be making history as the MCU's first deaf superhero. It's possible this could foretell Clint's own hearing loss being incorporated into the MCU, either on the big screen or in the Hawkeye series. Hearing loss is definitely no reason not to be a superhero. The Clint Barton in the comic books has certainly proved that many times over, but it could be part of his decision to retire. In fact, it seems like Clint has more reasons than most. He's already quit due to his family, and he's going to be training a new Hawkeye. Add compromised hearing to the list, and it wouldn't be a surprise if the trifecta is the final push Clint needs to stand down for good. Clint has already proven that you don't need to have superpowers to be a hero. But when he retires, he could show that there are even more ways to be a hero than being on the front lines. Being a good father, husband, and mentor are all ways for Clint to make the world a better place. Retiring from being a superhero is not easy, and if there's one hero who is all too aware of that, it's Bruce Banner. During the Avengers, we learned there was a moment when Bruce Banner decided he could no longer live with his relationship with the Hulk, and tried to take his own life. A deleted scene from The Incredible Hulk revealed he had trekked up to the top of a mountain in Alaska in order to take his own life. But when he fired, the Hulk spit out the bullet and was furious with Banner for what he had done. After that, Banner went into hiding, desperate to find a cure for his condition. It's not hard to see that Banner spent a long time trying desperately to escape from the curse of the Incredible Hulk, or at least what he perceived to be a curse at the time. He even helped create a worst-case scenario contingency plan in case the Hulk ever emerged and couldn't be stopped. More often than not, the Hulkbuster armor is used by Banner himself when letting the Hulk emerge isn't feasible, but it was actually designed to fight against the Hulk when he gets out of control. It wasn't until Thor Ragnarok when we learned that the MCU version of the Hulk was just as unhappy about their arrangement as Banner was. While most people suffered terribly in the aftermath of the decimation, the 5-year time skip in Endgame was actually a meaningful period of time for Banner and Hulk. In the comic books, the combination of Hulk and Banner is known as Professor Hulk, and he has the best of both worlds. He's intelligent like Bruce Banner, but incredibly strong like the Hulk. The result is a much more confident character able to use both brains and brawn. The Professor Hulk we saw during Endgame looked like he was the perfect solution to the Banner Hulk problem, but was he really? The reason the Hulk exists in the first place was because of the rage inside Banner combined with gamma radiation. Although we didn't see it emerge in that particular movie, it didn't necessarily go away. In the comic books, he can be downright cruel at times and doesn't always get along well with others. It's possible Professor Hulk is a temporary solution to a big green problem, and he will end up fighting with his fellow heroes at some point in the future. And when he's going all out, there are few people who can stand against the Incredible Hulk, let alone a creature with the might of the Hulk and the brilliance of Banner. Banner has been cured before by Reed Richards, a character whose movie rights were once owned by Fox. But now that Disney acquired the character, it's only a matter of time before he and the rest of the Fantastic Four join the MCU. His cure allowed Banner to transform into the Hulk at will, and even when he was transformed, he was still intelligent. Banner vowed never to allow the Hulk to emerge again. But this turned out to be impossible when an enemy hit him with a gamma ray, causing the Hulk to come back with a vengeance. It's been proven time and time again in the comics that while there are temporary solutions, the Hulk tends to come back more furious and powerful than ever before. And his rage isn't always directed at villains. Though many consider Bruce Banner a friend, there have been desperate attempts to get rid of the Hulk, including sending him to outer space. Sadly, it seems like the only permanent way to ever get the Hulk to retire would be to remove him from Earth forever, whether because he's marooned in outer space or whether he's passed away. For many heroes, retiring from active duty doesn't mean stepping away from the game entirely. Instead of being on the front lines, they could serve as a guy in the chair, helping current heroes discover information and traverse through missions. Or they can take on the role of mentoring new heroes to replace them. But these don't seem like options for Banner if things go sideways the way they tend to do in the comics. During this time, either the Hulk is isolated unwillingly or Banner voluntarily seeks solitude where he lives alone, far from civilization where he can't hurt anyone. Usually he's compelled to return when some threat greater than the Hulk appears, but it's possible that the risk of unleashing the Hulk will eventually be deemed too big a risk. And with all the new heroes being introduced to the MCU through Phase 4 and beyond, it's likely there will be powerful new heroes who are far less likely to fly into an uncontrollable rage. Out of all our heroes, the future of the Hulk or Banner sadly looks the most grim if we use the comic books to help predict what might happen. While there are periods of relative calm in his story, there's way too much uncontrollable rage and strength lurking just moments away. If Professor Hulk manages to maintain the status quo we saw during Endgame, then helping supply new heroes with tech could be a possible retirement plan. After all, when he returned to the Battle of New York, it was clear he doesn't have the same passion for smashing things he once did. But if the Hulk gets out of control again, it could mean a somber isolation for both Hulk and Banner, and possibly some serious destruction for everyone else, both heroes and villains. T'Challa is the ruler of Wakanda, and his rule has been threatened before. During Black Panther, his cousin Eric Killmonger came to stake his claim to the throne, but there could be an even greater threat facing not just T'Challa but all of Wakanda. The nation's incredible technological resources and access to vibranium make it incredibly powerful, but also a huge target for those who want to claim those things for themselves. In the comics, one frequent foe of Wakanda is someone who has been teased multiple times in the MCU. In Iron Man 2, there's a scene where Tony Stark meets up with Nick Fury to discuss the Avengers initiative. While they're talking, they're surrounded by various screens displaying important MCU events, such as the Hulk's rampage at Culver University or Mjolnir landing in New Mexico. But one shows a highlighted area many fans believe could be the legendary Atlantis, which is a real place in the comic books. Then there's also the fact that the company Oracle is mentioned at the Stark Expo. Namor the Submariner and frequent enemy of Wakanda calls Atlantis his home, and he also owns a company called Oracle Inc., which he funds with sunken treasure. And these aren't the only Namor Easter eggs we've seen so far. During Avengers Endgame, Natasha Romanoff is gathering status reports from the surviving heroes when Okoye tells her about an underwater earthquake off the coast of Wakanda. Although she seems unconcerned about the development, comic fans wondered if this was a clue that Namor would be showing up sooner rather than later. And his arrival could have serious consequences for not just T'Challa, but all of Wakanda. While he was under the influence of the Phoenix Force, he summoned a massive tidal wave which nearly wiped out all of Wakanda and claimed tons of innocent lives. Needless to say, T'Challa and Namor are not on good terms, to say the least, and they've had no shortage of conflict over the years. If Namor is introduced to the MCU, he could easily be part of T'Challa's downfall, and there could be someone not just willing but eager to take his place. While the MCU version of Shuri is brilliant, she also seems more than content to let her brother rule. But in the comic books, she was always eager to become the first female Black Panther, and was even willing to challenge her uncle Sayan for the title. T'Challa ended up getting there first and winning the battle, claiming the title for himself. We've seen her take part in battles in the MCU, but it's possible she will continue to grow as a fighter. At one point, T'Challa becomes incapacitated, and Shuri takes over as Queen of Wakanda and the Black Panther. Compared to the team we saw fight during the Battle of New York, T'Challa is a relatively new addition to the MCU lineup. He made his debut in Captain America: Civil War, but his story wasn't the focus of the movie. T'Challa lost his father and mistakenly believed Bucky Barnes was responsible for his loss, and tried to seek revenge. It wasn't until Black Panther that we learned more about Wakanda and got to see T'Challa in his home and learn more about their history. The movie ended with Wakanda going public with the fact that they're a force to be reckoned with. T'Challa helped fight against the Mad Titan Thanos during Infinity War and Endgame as well. But again, it wasn't really the focal point of either film. It seems likely T'Challa will get more of a build-up, but we don't expect him to rule Wakanda or act as a hero forever. When it's time for his reign to end, it seems likely that Shuri will be the one to replace him. Either way, he'll be defeated by an enemy like Namor, or he may age out of the role the way his father T'Chaka did and pass the torch along. It's also possible that he could decide to divide up his duties since Wakanda is now a greater part of the outside world. The establishment of the Wakandan International Outreach Center is likely just the beginning of the ramifications of Wakanda going public. The less insular Wakanda becomes, the harder job T'Challa will be as its ruler. It's possible he may find it too difficult to coordinate his royal duties with fighting as the Black Panther. If that happens, both T'Challa and Shuri could take up different roles in the challenge of protecting the planet. Or he could abdicate the throne to Shuri because he finds a new place to rule. In the comics, there's a city located beneath Wakanda known as Necropolis. When the Necropolis's undead soldiers attack Wakanda, T'Challa encounters the goddess Bastet and reveals that he wants to become the Black Panther again without displacing his sister. Bastet convinces T'Challa to become her champion and grants him the power and knowledge of all previous Black Panthers in exchange for him becoming the king of Necropolis. There have been more than a few superheroes with Marvel in their name over the years, and even Carol Danvers isn't the first. But there are going to be a lot more Marvels in the MCU as soon as Phase 4. And among all the current heroes, she's one of the most likely to disappear at any moment. Already we've seen Carol leave Earth for long periods of time. As she points out during Avengers Endgame, the universe is a big place. She doesn't even need a spaceship in order to traverse the universe, and she's dedicated to helping people even if they're not human. During the movie Captain Marvel, she vowed to expose the lies of the Kree and find a new home for the displaced Skrulls. These are both monumental tasks, so it's not surprising she was occupied elsewhere until Nick Fury's pager summoned her back to Earth following the decimation. Even in Spider-Man: Far From Home, Peter Parker wondered where she was, only to have Talos disguised as Fury inform him that she was otherwise occupied. But not to worry, because there are tons of other Marvel characters to take her place, and one of them we've already met. When Carol Danvers was living on Earth pre-superpowers, she befriended a woman named Maria Rambeau, and the two were incredibly close. She was also fond of Maria's daughter Monica, who was clearly in awe of her Auntie Carol. When Carol returned to Earth, Monica envied her powers and talked about how she would like to build a spaceship someday, a line which seemed quite prophetic. In the comics, Monica gains superpowers after she gets blasted with extra-dimensional energy and the media starts calling her Captain Marvel. She befriends Spider-Man and gradually the other Avengers who help her learn about her powers. Not only does she end up joining the team, but she's even the leader for a while until injuries caused her to retire. Since the name Marvel is in high demand, Monica changes her name to various things, including Daystar, Photon, and Spectrum. When the Avengers were indisposed and the world was being threatened, Monica started her own team of superheroes to combat the threat, the Mighty Avengers. This group contained heroes like Spider-Man, Luke Cage, Blue Marvel, and She-Hulk. Jennifer Walters, also known as She-Hulk, is getting her own show on Disney Plus during Marvel's Phase 4. So the idea of her teaming up with Monica doesn't seem out of the question. Maybe Monica will stick to keeping things safe on Earth, or maybe she really will take to the skies and fly through space like Carol Danvers. Right now, her fate seems pretty up in the air, especially considering which Phase 4 project she's going to be a part of. Teyonah Parris will be playing a grown-up Monica in the show WandaVision, which will tie into the movie Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. With madness, the multiverse, and tons of power in the mix, this show could set the stage for Monica to be a bigger part of the MCU in the future, possibly taking the place of Carol Danvers. But let's not forget that there is yet another Marvel hero coming soon. Kamala Khan is not just a superhero. She's also a huge fan of superheroes. She's a young Muslim woman who gains powers as the result of Terrigen mists. Kamala always looks up to Carol Danvers and starts going by the name Miss Marvel as a tribute to her own personal hero and a promise to protect people from danger. She's also getting her own show on Disney+, so both she and Monica will be joining the MCU. And they have one other major thing in common: the Avengers. Even though she was young, Kamala's crime fighting as Miss Marvel impressed the adult Avengers who invited her to join their team. She also worked with teenage heroes many fans would love to see in the MCU, including Nova and Miles Morales. Like many young heroes, Kamala often finds it difficult to balance her private life with her duties as a hero, which could be a compelling reason to have her stay on Earth instead of flying to outer space the way Carol Danvers tends to. And there are plenty of things that could occupy Carol's time in space. She set out to expose the lies of the Kree, but what does that mean on a practical level? If she's going to take out the supreme intelligence of the Kree, then what will happen to their people? The Kree Empire is enormous and has no shortage of advanced technology at its disposal. Simply annihilating the Kree would be quite a task, even for someone as powerful as Captain Marvel. But even if she could do so, that doesn't mean she would. While there have been some notably evil Kree like Ronan the Accuser and Jan Rog, that doesn't mean all the Kree are inherently evil. Yet if Captain Marvel destroys the Supreme Intelligence and leaves the Kree to their own devices, it seems likely someone will step up to lead who has less than virtuous intentions. So maybe it's possible that Captain Marvel will go from being a pawn of the Kree to a ruler of the Kree, or at least someone who keeps them in line. While the MCU Avengers generally focus their attention on Earth, there are other organizations out there who oversee things on a much larger level. When they're all working together, the Guardians of the Galaxy have been able to accomplish incredible feats. But keeping this group together isn't as easy as it looks. The first movie really drove home the point that they're all difficult in their own ways, and aren't particularly well suited to being parts of a team. In particular, Peter Quill has had some incredible adventures outside of the Guardians in the comic books. In the MCU, we learned that Peter's father was Ego, the living planet, an ultra-powerful celestial who had caused the demise of Peter's human mother. But in the comics, his father is a member of a race called the Spartoi, hailing from the planet Spartax. Jason was the Spartoi emperor at the time Peter was conceived, and left Earth shortly after. Rather than being summoned by his father, the comic book Peter Quill stole a Kree spaceship in order to fulfill his dream of visiting space, where he was then discovered by Yondu. At one point, Peter is elected president of Spartax, his father's home planet. Thus, Peter trades in his leadership role in the Guardians of the Galaxy for a political career. Not only did Peter have a career outside of the Guardians, but he had a romance as well. He was involved with Kitty Pryde of the X-Men, a character many fans are anxious to see join the MCU. She even encouraged him to become the leader of the Spartoi Empire, a role which caused Peter to push away his friends. Not only that, but his duties as king made it impossible for him to fly off and fight crime the way he used to. The result was Rocket taking over as leader of the Guardians, at least for a period of time. Even though his origin story has some important differences, Peter has definitely proven himself a capable leader in the MCU. It would definitely be interesting to see him act as the ruler of an empire as opposed to a small group of mercenaries. Another character whose comic book story might have an impact on him leaving the Guardians is Drax the Destroyer. In the comics, Drax was once a human named Arthur Douglas. When Arthur and his wife lost their lives at the hands of Thanos, Arthur was revived and transformed into Drax to get revenge. While Drax thought his daughter had perished, she was actually still alive, and Heather Douglas became the hero known as Moondragon. This is another character many fans have been eager to see in the MCU, especially as its scope expands outside the boundaries of Earth. For so long, Drax's only focus has been getting revenge for his family, but what happens now that he has it? Thanos is gone as of Endgame, and Ronan was defeated in Guardians of the Galaxy. In the comics, Drax feels aimless when he's no longer a destroyer, and struggles with Moondragon, who decides to become a goddess of the planet Ba-Benis. When he tries to stop her, she removes his life essence and his body is destroyed. It's a sad ending, and while Drax is eventually resurrected, it's possible that wouldn't happen in the MCU. Perhaps Drax couldn't live not being a destroyer, but may feel comforted in the end to know that his daughter survived. Some MCU characters are so different from their comic book counterparts that looking to the source material doesn't provide much direction. Mantis in the MCU is timid and doesn't show confidence in her powers. But in the comics, Mantis is assertive and independent in addition to being a master of martial arts. In the MCU, she seems to attach herself to supportive roles, so it's possible she could end up helping someone like Peter in a similar way to how she once assisted Ego. Nebula is another character who is very different than she is in the comic books. When we first met Nebula in Guardians of the Galaxy, she was more of a villain before eventually getting along with Gamora and making new friends following the decimation. Will her heroic streak continue, or will she act as more of a space pirate like she does in the comic books? It's possible many members of the group would simply settle down by exploring their own terms instead of constantly trying to save it. For some time, Rocket even worked delivering packages in outer space after the Guardians disbanded. Although he looks like a raccoon, don't forget that he's a brilliant inventor. Not all of the Guardians' missions involved saving the world. Some of them involve simple transport or retrieval missions. If characters like Rocket and Groot decide they're not willing to put their lives on the line to save the universe, there are plenty of things they could do to fill their days and their pockets. As for what will happen to Gamora, that depends in no small part on where she is now. We saw her lose her life at the hands of Thanos during Infinity War, and like the others who perished outside of the decimation, she didn't return during Endgame. However, the version of Gamora from 2014 who never met the Guardians of the Galaxy did manage to make it into the future. At the end of the movie, it was ambiguous whether she has returned to her own time or whether she still exists in the present-day MCU. In the comics, Gamora doesn't come from Earth 616, but travels there from Earth 7528. Maybe she'll cease to exist in the main MCU timeline, but will remain safe in another universe. Scott Lang may be one of the newer additions to the MCU lineup, but that doesn't mean he'll always be around. In fact, there have been some heavy-handed hints that Marvel Studios is already eyeing his replacement. Not only could Scott end up retired, but he could be succeeded by his own daughter. In the movies Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp, Cassie Lang is a little girl who thinks Scott is a hero even before he puts on the suit. When he reignites his superhero career following his time on house arrest, Cassie says it would be safer if Scott had a partner to watch his back when things get tough. Although he assumes she's talking about Hope Van Dyne, she's actually referring to herself and seems disappointed that her dad didn't pick up on that. But while Cassie might have been a little young to fight crime in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Avengers Endgame managed to solve that little issue. In the first movie, Cassie has her birthday party on July 20th, and during the sequel, Cassie is said to be 10 years old, meaning she was born on July 20th, 2007. Since 2023 is the current post-decimation year in the MCU, Cassie should be approximately 16 years old. When Thanos snapped his fingers during Infinity War, he wiped out half of all life in the universe. But Cassie was one of the people who stayed behind. Scott also survived the decimation but spent most of his time trapped in the quantum realm after his friends manning Hank Pym's controls vanished in the decimation. When he reunites with Cassie during Endgame, 5 long years have passed, meaning his little girl is that much closer to being grown up and being a superhero in her own right. Scott Lang has spent a lot of time either locked up in prison or on house arrest in the MCU, but he still tries his best to be a devoted father to Cassie. In the comic books, Cassie spends a lot of time at the Avengers Mansion and becomes close with many of Scott's fellow heroes. But while Cassie loves this life, her mother and stepfather aren't quite so sure about it. In the first Ant-Man movie, Cassie's mom and stepdad were wary about allowing Scott back into Cassie's life due to his time in prison and his inability to find employment. Although they've since formed a closer relationship, it's not hard to see why they might disapprove of Cassie pursuing a career as a superhero. In the comics, they're so against it that they actually take Scott to court in order to limit his parental rights and keep Cassie out of harm's way. While Scott is always ready to step up and be a superhero, he's always made it clear that Cassie is his top priority. What would he do if he was forced between being Ant-Man and being just Cassie's dad? It's possible being faced with this choice and the prospect of losing Cassie could convince him to walk away from being a superhero. But how fitting would it be to have Cassie step up on her own just as Scott backs down? Then keeping Cassie safe would take on a whole new meaning. It's easy to forget that Scott is a really smart guy, especially in the context of the MCU. After all, his brilliance generally pales in comparison to the intellectual heavy hitters like Hank Pym, Bruce Banner, and the late Tony Stark. But while Scott may not be capable of designing devices to explore the quantum realm or travel through time, he's no fool. He's pulled off some truly impressive heists in the past, which is the whole reason Hank Pym chose him to wear the Ant-Man suit in the first place. If Scott's skills are good enough to impress Hank Pym, they could definitely help out Cassie and possibly other young heroes as well. If the Young Avengers are introduced in the MCU, they could definitely use some help and resources, especially from a hero who's been there before. It's also possible there could be some similarities between the story of Cassie Lang and Hope Van Dyne. The Wasp was eager to be a hero, but her father tried to hold her back because he was worried for her. This is definitely something Cassie and Hope might bond over if Cassie decides to become a hero. We have to admit, we like the idea of heroes like Ant-Man sticking around to support the next generation of Avengers. What do you think will happen when the Avengers retire? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below and then click subscribe for more videos from CBR. Bye for now.